Or paragraph 66, that's page 54 of the book. Um,
Um,
Let me just refresh our memory of where we are in Plato. So I'm going to just read a bit. So we've arrived at this discourse on what Damascus calls the discourse on detachment in the Phaedo, where he's talking about that the philosopher should desire death by separating himself from all the pleasures and things. So the first part is so he divides this into three parts. Into first that the philosopher despises physical pleasure, and then that sense perception is an obstacle to true knowledge. And third, that that forms can only be apprehended in pure thought. And so it starts with, consider then, my good sir, whether you share my opinion, for this will lead us to a better knowledge of what we are investigating. Do you think it is the part of a philosopher to be concerned with such so-called pleasures as those of food and drink? By no means. What about the pleasures of sex? Not at all. What of the other pleasures concerned with the service of the body? Do you think such a man prizes them greatly, the acquisition of distinguished clothes and shoes, and other bodily ornaments, or do you think he values these or despises them, except insofar as one cannot do without them? I think the true philosopher despises them. Do you not think, he said, that in general such a man's concern is not with the body, but that, as far as he can, turns away from the body and towards the soul? I do. So, in the first place, such things show clearly that the philosopher, more than other men, frees the soul from the association with the body as much as possible. Apparently, remembering that this is like the definition of death that he just introduced to separate the soul from the body and the body from the soul. A man who
mhm.
finds no pleasure in such things and has no part in them is thought by the majority not to deserve to live and to be close to death. The man, that is, who does not care for the pleasures of the body, which say certainly too. True. So that's the first part of the discourse on detachment. The second part now is about acquiring knowledge. Then what about the actual acquiring of knowledge? Is the body an obstacle when one associates with it in the search for knowledge? I mean, for example, do men find any truth in sight or hearing, or are not even the poets forever telling us that we do not see or hear anything accurately? And surely, if those two physical senses are not clear or precise, our other senses can hardly be accurate, as they are all inferior to these. Do you not think so? I certainly do. When, then, he asks, does the soul grasp truth? For whenever it attempts to examine anything with the body, it is clearly deceived by it. True. It is not in reasoning, if anywhere, that any reality becomes clear to the soul? Yes.
Mhm.
And indeed, the soul reasons best when none of these senses troubles it, neither hearing, nor sight, nor pain, nor pleasure, but when it is most by itself, taking leave of the body, and as far as possible having no contact or association with it in search for reality. That is so. And it is then the soul of the philosopher most disdains the body, flees from it, and seeks to be by itself. It appears so. So that's the second part. Just generally that the soul knows best by separating itself from the body. Now, this what about the following introduces a third point. What about the following, Simius? Do we say that there is such a thing as the just itself or not? We do say so, by Zeus. And the beautiful and the good, of course. Have you ever seen any of these things with your eyes? In no way, he said. Or have you ever grasped them with any of your bodily senses? And speaking of all such things as bigness, health, strength, and in a word, the reality of all of the things, that which each of them is essentially is. Of course, the Greek here can go to different ways. Is what is most true in them contemplated through the body, or is this the position, whoever of us prepares himself best and most accurately to grasp that thing itself, which he is investigating, will come close to the knowledge of it, obviously. Then he will do this most perfectly, who approaches the object with thought alone, without associating any sight with his thought, or dragging in any sense perception with his reasoning, but who, using pure thought alone, tries to track down each reality pure and by itself, freeing himself as far as possible from eyes and ears, and in a word, from the whole body, because the body confused the soul does not allow it to acquire truth and wisdom whenever it is associated with it. Will not that man reach reality, Simmias, if anyone does? What you say, said Simmias, is indeed true. So that's the third thing, which is about that the forms are best known through pure thought. and this no, not associating any sight with his thought or dragging any sense perception with his reasoning reminds me of the Timaeus' definition of how we know perceptible realities, right? Opinion with perception, and whereas the intelligibles are known by noesis, right? Insight together with thought, with logos. So anyway, that's the passage that we'll be reading about today. And we started already reading about it at the end of last class. And so this paragraph 66 is within this initial section of 63 to 67, which is about the whole passage. And then he'll start talking about each of the three parts separately. So do you want to read 66?
Yeah, okay, here. I got it. Of the proofs of immortality. So the argument from opposites corresponds to the first point of discourse on detachment, the argument from recollection to the second, and the argument from similarity to things intelligible to the third. We already said
Right.
what these three parts of the discourse are.
It's the three
Um,
parts I pointed out right now. The
oh,
first, that the philosopher despises physical pleasure. The second, that he knows best when he separates himself from the body. And the third is that the forms are best known
okay.
to to pure thought. And so he
Mhm.
sees there's a correspondence between the speech uh, of Socrates about how the philosopher should behave with these three proofs of immortality, right? So the
Mhm.
argument of opposites is, well, things are always coming to be from their opposites. So um, so that means that living things should come from dead things, so things that were previously not in a body, and therefore you prove the pre-existence of the soul. And there are many difficulties with this argument. Damascus has a whole monograph on it. But anyway, he says that corresponds to the point that the philosopher despises physical pleasure, probably because it's an idea that there's an opposition between the soul and the body, right? What the soul wants, what the body wants. The argument for recollection then is that the soul doesn't, what the soul knows, it doesn't know through the body. Rather, it knows it because it already knew that previously, right, through recollection. And so that's the idea that knowledge is best had separate from the body. And the argument for similarity to things intelligible is that it's the so-called affinity argument, that there's an affinity between the soul and the forms, and since the forms are simple, the soul are simple and immutable, so the soul will also be. And he says that that is like the argument that the philosopher should want to separate from the body because that what allows him to know the forms. There, the connection is kind of um, clearer. But anyway, this is in general pointing out just how Plato has organized his text, but also showing how the later, as it were, theoretical bits correspond to the practical injunctions here.
Mhm. Then 67. Correspondingly, the life of purification has 3 degrees. Um, the first one is discarding all the confusion of Genesis, of how do you call it, becoming, which has attached itself to our true being. That's first stage. Second stage, meeting one's own pure self. And third stage, being united with one's own cause by returning that which is purest in oneself. So that
Right.
would be first, hating or right, having despising the bodily pleasures would be this unconfusion. Then knowledge, I'm not sure, some kind of identification with uh, non-bodily knowledge is the second thing. And then the causes, which are the forms, something like that.
Yeah, I think a few things. Yeah, the first thing is not being involved in pleasures and pains. That stuff that we saw in Porphyry and Plotinus about how you don't take pleasures and pains as a guide for anything, about something being good or bad, and just seeking the minimum possible of, just satisfying your bodily needs and nothing more. The which has attached ourselves to our true being. Um, so here it just says the which has attached itself um in the Greek. And the word here, prosphunta, is this comes from Plato's Timaeus, also the confusion, the great confusion of Genesis. And in Proclus's interpretation of this passage in the Timaeus, it's talking about the pneumatic vehicle, right? So there's a question, and how this is connection with purification. Well, there's a question of like when we pick our lives after death, how is it that, people are still affected by their previous habits and their previous bodily desires? It's well, one of the ways that one of the elements of the Neoplatonic explanation of this is that, well, after you're dead, you still have this pneumatic body, which is the seat of your imagination and where you like your desire for ambition, any desire that's not strictly connected with your body. So any desire that's like not need for sleep, food, or drink, that's where it resides. And so discarding that, so being, separating yourself from all that is separating yourself from these desires that are still perceptible. They're still to do with material things, but they're not specific to your body, right? And that will guarantee that you don't transmigrate into another human being or another animal, right? And meeting one's pure self, yeah, I think that was you spelled that out right. It's like some kind of knowing your access with non-empirical knowledge. So the Greek can also be something like keeping converse with your pure self in a pure way. And I think that's then something like doing math, right? Mathematics and other sciences that depend on our innate knowledge. And so you're, as it were, talking with your pure self when you do that. And then the third, being united with your cause by returning to that which is purest in oneself. The purest in oneself here might be nous, right? And then your nous connects with the nous that produces you as a soul. And then that's why this is then like, as it were, the final step of the life of purification, and what then transitions into the life of contemplation, right? Um, So that's again just establishing the three things. And again, this will correspond to the three parts of this discourse. The first is the philosopher despises physical pleasure, so that's discarding all confusion of Genesis. The second is that the soul knows best when it is together with itself. That's the second point. And the third is that it can only know the forms through pure thought. And that's the third thing, being with your cause. Um, okay, so let's see what he says about the first part of the discourse.
Okay. Now, 68. In what way can indifference towards pleasures be said to be peculiar to man at this stage of purification? Surely he shares it with those who have achieved the civic or the moral virtues. Okay.
Right.
Um, the answer is, let's see, the answer is that the others, though they do not seek pleasure as an end, it's in itself, for each of them pursues his own ends, will sometimes seek it as a mean to an end. And even this cannot be said of those on the way of purification.
Right. So the civic virtues, that's how he's translating the political virtues, right? So they're the virtues of the republic, and they have to do with moderating your appetites. And the moral virtues here are prior to that. So it's We saw this in It came up in Marinus. So this is like the virtues of a good upbringing, that you learn to be a good member of your family and not a good citizen. Um, the I guess the point is like these. It's a civic thing, for instance, for you. Oh, I'll give myself this candy bar because that will let me rest, and then I'll be able to uh, fulfill my functions, my other things I have to do better. And so their pleasure is not sought as an end in itself, but it is sought as a means to an end. Whereas those on the way of purification don't even use pleasure as a means, presumably because it's opposed to the end that they want, which is separation of the soul from the body. So you would not even have a candy to give yourself a reward or let yourself rest or something, because you're trying to get yourself off of any dependence on candy and any idea that, oh, this is sweet, therefore this is good. Right? You're trying to eliminate that from your moral habits. And so that's why the indifference towards pleasures is something that he thinks is um, proper to the purificatory life, right? And indeed, that's
Right. He already made the civic level like uh more like you said, shares this indifference to pleasure. I mean, we usually would say like something like the civic level is only about like moderating pleasure, not about destroying it or entirely being indifferent to it.
yeah. The civic and the moral pleasure is subordinated to other ends. So pleasure itself won't tell you that something is. Um, it's not true already if you have a civic. If you have these lower virtues, you already won't reason just because something is pleasurable, therefore it is good. However, you might think that because something is pleasurable and other reasons, right? This pleasure will let me rest and be more fit to do other things, then you might still do it that might still recommend something. Whereas in the purificatory level, the fact that something is pleasurable is does not recommend it one bit at all. You know? So
Something like,
pleasure can still be seen as a means for for people in the civic or moral level.
so this would be something like the life of hedonism would be the one where pleasure is the goal. And even
Yeah,
even the civic life is already not choosing that as the goal. So the goal is whatever is good for the city or something.
yeah,
And but pleasure is does have like an some kind of secondary sense of a goal. Because we're only what I'm trying to get at, because it seems like also purification is only concerned with pleasure not being an end. Because it's not like pleasure is bad, it's more like pleasure. I mean, it does say Plato says he despises pleasure.
yeah.
Um,
Um, let me let me just call up here the Greek. So, um, file, no, right, you Plato, and yeah, 65. Um, okay. So this will be is the expression here is the espudakenai. Um, the other things. Yeah, he says here that he should be indifferent to pleasures. I'm trying to find exactly where this would be if he's not describing that in general, or uh yeah, I th well, here's not it's the idea that he's not busy with it, not so much that it's so this thing. Do you think it is the part of a philosopher to be concerned with with so-called pleasures? And here, so yeah, it's the not being concerned with pleasures. That's the this indifference. So the case of purification to go back is that pleasure is not an end, and pleasure is not a means to an end. Right? There's just nothing good about it. But not that there's something evil about it immediately. It's just in um it's not even good as an end. So I don't know. We can take something else instead of pleasure, for instance. We can think of fire, right? So unless you might think that on one level there are people who like really like watching fire, and they think that fire itself is beautiful. And but then you could think that like there are people who never use fire. They never don't think fire is an end. They just think that fire is good for cooking or good for heating themselves. But fire itself is, they might even think that fire is dangerous. And then there are people who refuse to use any fire because they think it's super dangerous, and because I don't know, they think everything they can always get burnt or everything is made of wood. And then they just use electrical things and they never use fire. And the purificatory would be something like the person who just uses electrical things and never uses fire, even as a means to an end.
Okay, and it would seem from what you're saying that that itself would be as a means, like something like since this purifying person is trying to get away from the body, pleasures bind him to the body, is trying to get away. Like it's not so much a
Right.
judgment about pleasure as like it's not useful for this, something like that.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. It's counterproductive. Yeah. Yeah, there's no direct thing of like that the pleasure itself is evil, and that the purificatory person thinks that, for instance, the political person who does indulge in pleasures occasionally is thereby evil or something. It's just it's a less stringent moral. He follows a less stringent moral ideal, but he also wants lesser things, right? He doesn't, for instance, he doesn't want to know he doesn't want to know the forms. He doesn't want to be a philosopher. Um, shall we continue?
Yes, okay. So now 69.
Yeah.
Because
And
purification is its
just
theme.
in this, the first paragraph is Damascus's view, and the second one is Practice's.
Okay. So because purification is its theme, the discourse starts with the lowest functions and proceeds to the highest. Nutrition is common to all living beings. Copulation goes with irrational appetites. The wearing of ornaments, these are the like lists of things that Plato mentioned. The wearing of ornaments is a form of irrationality found. That's a weird thing. We're gonna get into the question if there's irrational things or something. If there's rational irrational things, sorry. Wearing of ornaments is a form of irrationality found only in rational creatures. One could also start with the most necessary pleasures and ascend to the least necessary. But that would be a different order. Plato's order is the order of functions, lower meaning more shared, more common.
Yeah. So yeah, those are two ways. You could also think of these as Also that the more common is the more necessary, and the more rare is the least necessary, right? So nutrition is more necessary than copulation. Copulation is more necessary than ornaments. So those are
Hmm.
two ways that um, Damascus sees the order of these things. Then, um, so just to comment on that, you asked about are there irrational and irrational things? So these things are irrational in the sense I think that they are not um, they don't respond to reason in right. You can't argue with them. Um, and well, I mean, I think the needing to eat, nutrition, and also copulation they don't respond to arguments. I mean, that's one way of why these are called irrational powers, right? They're not motivated by reasons or by things. And although, it's true that you can have like reasons to lead a purificatory life and not indulge in them, right? Um, and the wearing of ornaments then is the last one. It occurs to me also that wearing of ornaments is something proper to the feverish city in Plato's Republic, right? So Socrates first proposes a city where they just get on basic needs, and then Glaucon says, "Oh, that's a city of pigs." And then he says, "Oh, you want a feverish city, one where everyone wants luxury goods and all that stuff." And that there he says it's a form of irrationality, only found in rational creatures. So only found in human beings, I guess. Um, Although, of course, it's interesting because we say that we often describe plumage and things like that in animals as forms of ornamentation that they have, right? Um, and so, yeah, so these are, and why is it irrational? I think it's because the idea is ornaments only, ornaments are about giving pleasure or having pleasure. And or even it's about wearing an ornament is about making yourself beautiful, making yourself um, look good in the eyes of others. And again, that has to do with this need for approval of affection from others, right? That's the why it's seen as a form of irrationality. Uh, it's like a basic desire that doesn't appear due to some goal that you're pursuing, something like that. Because you could also say, oh, wearing ornaments is like super rational depending on what you want to get, if you want to convince other people to do things. So that's the one way, but they're all seen as forms of irrationality also because in this discourse the philosophers should shun all of them. So that's how Damascus would want to or sees the order here. But um, Proclus has a different way of organizing it, which is in the next paragraph.
Right. There would be like some kind of function argument that makes these kinds of things human goods, like anything that only like we like that's where the city without any taste and stuff is a pig is for pigs because it seems like it's more human to have ornaments and things like that.
Right. I mean, it's not clear because if I remember correctly, the the city of pigs is going to have lots of free time, and they're just going to be praising the gods all the time, and in their free
Mm.
time. And um, like when the Europeans arrived in the Americas, they very often portrayed the natives here as like living cities of pigs. Like they don't try to produce excess. They just eat and hunt what they need. and then they spend the rest of the day like resting or in their rituals and things. They don't seek more things. And it was very shocking to them. And um, so there was this idea of the locals as living out this city of
Mhm.
pigs. Um, no, I'm not so sure. I think that the city of pigs might actually be the um might actually be like a better city since Plato calls the other city fevered, sick, you know. So it's unclear whether it's not human. Um, and yeah, uh, I mean, you could say that, and again, I don't know, the function argument, how would it go? It's more human, because as I just mentioned, like if you're making this argument today, we talk about lots of animals using ornaments, you know, and making themselves pretty and things. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it would be it might be connect like something like maybe something like an I don't know if that's would be true, but something like the same argument about like writing poetry or using arguments in service of pleasures or something like that. Like we say, well, maybe sexual attraction is something shared with all animals, but I don't think any animals write poetry to attract the mates or something like that. That would be like a better example of like this, what he would call irrational, rational, a form of irrationality found only in rational animals.
Right. That's true. Yeah, of course, because you could think that like love poetry is just ornamentation in speech. Um and it's just pretty words. Like makeup is a pretty face. Um and and that's true. The so so yeah, I think there might be something, yeah, there might be something properly of the political level, maybe even of the moral level for him. Because here you might be, you're using pleasure for some further end, and that might be an important end. So, like, of course, the ornamentation and poetry uh, give pleasure, but you're using them, for instance, to give an award to someone and to make someone, someone to give, to recognize the merit of someone else. And this is important to, reward good behavior in the city or in the family. And then there, that's pleasure subordinate to a further end. Mhm. Um, but yeah, I wonder what after the essays, yeah, another way of translating this would be wearing of ornaments belongs to the um irrational powers of to the rational powers, something like that. Um, that might be a way of spelling it out. Um, yeah, the irrational behavior of the rational faculty. Okay, so maybe it's not irrational behavior. It's not purely rational because the reason when it's doing ornaments and so on, it's not just pursuing knowledge, I guess, not just pursuing its own things. The commentator's own
Okay.
division?
Yeah. So now the commentator's own division, however, is based on the objects of the appetites. They may be, who's the commentator on?
Proclus.
Okay, so they have the different division. There's
Yeah.
different objects. They may be necessary and natural, like food, or neither. So like ornaments which are not necessary or natural. Or natural but not necessary, like sex. Or necessary but not natural, like indispensable clothing and shelter.
Right. Which is,
Natural just means something like what your body does by itself or something like that.
yeah, precisely. Natural here as opposed to by art. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a physis techne distinction. And yeah, although here I guess Damascus doesn't like Procluses because Proclus goes beyond the text, because there's no mention of the clothing and shelter in the text,
Mhm.
right? Presumably because he's just talking about pleasures, and therefore he's not just talking about things that are simply necessary. Um, oh,
Okay.
this now the next one will introduce a distinction. First, we get Proclus's answer, then Damascus's.
Okay. But this doesn't make like a big difference, right? Like, I mean, in some sense, necessary is just necessary, or natural is just natural, but like one is worse or something.
Right. No, here I think in both cases, what the commentators want to explain is why does Plato mention these things and in this order? And so Proclus is trying to show that he's covered all the objects of the appetites, except those that are strictly necessary. And Damascus wants to show that since it's about purification, then it has, as it were, this hierarchy of
Mhm.
of going up the ladder, more and of more refined appetites.
Okay. Now, 70. But supposing the philosopher is a ruler, will he not affect the apparel that befits a king? If he becomes a priest, will he not wear the sacerdotal garments? This is answered by the addition, except in so far or absolutely inevitable.
Right. So this is the Proclus's answer. So he says, well, philosopher or m might, because of his office, because of a social need, use expensive clothing, but then that's covered by the fact that it's absolutely inevitable. Um,
So that's like the
uh,
necessity excuse.
yeah, that's like a necessity excuse. Yeah,
Although it's inevitable, I guess, because people are not philosophers. Like in the true city of pigs, there would be no need for that.
exactly. In the true city of figs, there will be no need for that. Yeah.
Um, then, or rather, so that's a different answer. There is no question at all here of men in these functions, but only of the man in search of purification. If he should need sacred robes for this purpose, he would wear them as symbols, not as garments.
Right. That's interesting. So this is Damascus, and Damascus says this question is simply out of place, right? Because we're just talking about what's necessary to purify ourselves. And he's saying, well, you might need these robes for purification. So, for instance, I guess he's thinking of something like you need a fine white linen robe after you've undergone some kind of bath, right? As like some initiation, something like that. And then he says, well, then you're just using it as a symbol. And I guess he's using it in the technical term of like a theurgic symbol, something that connects you directly to the gods. And not as, as something to show, right? To neither something to cover yourself with, to make sure you're not cold, and also not as something just for other people to see. There's some theurgic function.
Hmm.
That's his explanation.
But
Um,
like his more like technical thing is in way of explaining the text is like, well, this text is not about someone who needs to be a king. That would be a whole different story. We're talking
Yeah.
about someone who's aiming to purify. If you also aiming to be a king or even to be a priest, that's a different dialogue or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
But there is at least for the priestly kind, there is there are certain because it was mentioned these sacred garments,
Okay.
and there is need for these in the service of purification as symbols.
Yeah.
Like there could be a two-level explanation of a priest because priests are supposed to have some kind of purificatory virtue. And then you say, so why are you wearing all these beautiful clothing? And then the answer would be, well, there's two answers. One is because you are not purified and I need you to respect me. So there's like the inevitable answer. And two,
Right.
because this has a symbolic effect and it's not really about the beauty, it's about some kind of theurgy.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
Okay.
Um,
Although philosophers don't need clothing, I guess, because they only teach by argument and
I guess it did, however, it did, uh, and the Greeks, they did have reports of the gymnosophists in India, right, who are the naked sophists. So they could hear of these people, they heard of these people, although I think they found them rather exotic. Um,
yeah, okay. Um, Now 71. Why does Socrates not declare the philosopher inaccessible to greed or ambition as yet?
right. He
So he
hasn't
talked
said that.
about bodily pleasures, not about these extra bloodily
Yeah,
kind of things.
yeah, he didn't say that he despises money, and he also didn't say that he despises honors, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sorry, I understood. Because the answer is because his object was to prove the soul detachable from the body. That it exists independently of things extraneous to the body is evident to anyone. So the opposite, like something like these things are obviously not the soul, uh, because they're not even attached to the body. Um, or perhaps the denial of these is implied in the denial of care of the body and in what he calls the directing of the soul towards itself.
Right. So that's the first answer, presumably Procluses. And so the first is that, yeah, so these things are independent of the body. If he so shows that the soul is independent of the body, then a fortiori it's independent of like money and honors. This this seems like a bad argument. I mean, money, sure, but it seems like that honors are, and like vanity is something that you can have in, independent of having a body. Like you want to be famous and you'll be famous after you die, right? And so that's these things seem to go a lot, continue after your death and after you're separate from the body. So this a fortiori argument, it seems a poor argument to me. But then he says, well, these things have to do with what is implied, that he implies the denial of, wanting honors or money when he says that you should direct the sword towards itself. That makes more sense, right? He's saying that it has to do with turning yourself towards, knowing your true self and knowing what the soul is in itself, and therefore you won't be cared about, for instance, what other people think about the soul, right? What other people think about you. So, and therefore, that's implied there also. But Damascus has another way of thinking about it.
Mm, but it seems plausible that these arguments also prove the soul immune against the influences of sense perception and imagination.
Right. So things like desire for money and desire for honor, these are pleasures of the imagination. And pleasures, and if you if you despise the pleasures of the body, then then you also will despise the perception and the pleasures of perception. And if you don't like the pleasures of perception, you won't like the pleasures of the imagination. Um,
Mm.
yeah, I'm not really sure that follows because we know people who love to live in their dreams and they love to live in their head. And they can even despise taking care of themselves. They can even despise bodily pleasures. Of course, nowadays with virtual pleasures, this is even clearer. And um, and therefore, it seems you can despise the body without despising these things. Of all these explanations of why Plato doesn't include the despising these other things, I think the best is that it's included in directing the soul towards itself.
Like I guess the basic like tension in this question is that these it's similar to like what we had earlier with like the hierarchy of pleasures. Like there isn't there's different ways of treating these extra bodily things. And they're not pleasures. I don't know what we want to call them, pleasures or I don't know uh, things like honor and money. Um, like on there's like one argument that says these are less rational or they're at least less about yourself. Like we have this like argument like Aristotle and people like wanting living for honor is weird because you don't even own it. Honor is in other people.
Mm,
Like if you think that, but it's based on like an assumption that the good must be in your own control or pertaining to yourself, can't be someone else that should control your good. Um, so that's like the way in which it's worse. Like, or this is similar to the same thing. Like, so food and sex are pleasures of the body, and these are pleasures not even of the body, right? Because they're further from the self. They're like worse. There would be an argument similar to the like the anti-city of pigs argument, which would say something like the opposite, something like these are more human things, something like these belong to the social body or the social soul. Uh, Animals have less need for pleasure and ambition than
right.
human animals, and there is something I don't know rational or something like then we get into discussion though, so is it rational? Well, it's not rational in the sense like there isn't an argument for why this would be good for you, unless it's for a means, like I need to control in order to do something. But it's then it's something outside of you. Like a philosopher might say something like you can make like a Platonic kind of argument that would go something like in a sense where like if like adults or we have this like idea that um, more mature people would prefer honor to physical pleasure. Like it's a lower thing to embarrass yourself for physical pleasure, like a child would do. And
Mm,
like culture, a lot of culture is just right having thumos control physical pleasure, and
right.
and then that would just be the first step towards things that are entirely not you. That would be like an entirely different way of conceptualizing separation where it's like getting away from yourself. Here it's like getting towards yourself. And then these things are you're getting it's like first like there's two different I could imagine two different like ladders. Like there's one person who uh first thinks of like, okay, what should I do? Well, honor is really dumb because it's not even about me. So then he's like dedicating himself to food and pleasure. And then he says, like, well, that's not me either because I guess my body is not me and all the fatal arguments. Um, or there could be someone that goes the opposite way. And like like there are such people, like the first kind of people, like sex and food are rational because at least like well, they're also harder to avoid than honor, I guess. But they're also
Right.
like more rational in the
Yeah.
sense of like at least I enjoy it. There's something going on. Who knows if honors even
Right.
exist? Maybe the other guy's laughing at me. Really, he doesn't really respect me, and so on. Um, but there
Ye
could be like an opposite thing where like food is the most like embodied thing or the most limbs things stuck in this body. And then you're like, well, now I'm an adult, now I care about honor. And then there would be like the Platonic argument would be to say something like, what's the true honor or something like that. But it would be my thought would be something like, well, if things further from your body are better, then maybe intellect, which is even further, would be even better. Something like that. Not sure if this makes
Yeah.
sense.
No, no, it makes sense. Yeah. So like you can think of two ways of approaching, yeah, of separating yourself from the body. Um, or yeah, or or separating yourself from pleasures where you first, okay, I'll restrict myself just to the strictly necessary pleasures and then not even those. Or you can say, well, first I will take on like let's say imaginary pleasures and then not even those, right? Presumably the thing about is like, yeah, once like you enter, let's say you enter like a monastery or a group, an ascetic group, and then the only thing that matters for you while you're in this group is how these other people perceive you. And because like that depends on whether you're fed or not. That's like in this group it depends on how they see you. So you only care about honor, but then eventually care you don't care about the honor, you care about deserving the honor, right? About them giving it to you for the right reason, and then that leads you to act rationally, something like that. Yeah, that those are two things. And so since, that might be one reason why Plato hasn't mentioned it, because indeed, lo love of honor can be one way for you to get away from the bodily pleasures. It could also be that so Damascus introduced this correspondence between these points about the philosopher's life and the arguments of for the immortality of the soul. Now he corresponded this argument with the first or this part that despising physical pleasures. He corresponded it to the argument from opposites. And now the argument about opposites has a problem that Simmias Cebes raised, which is it shows you survive, but doesn't show you that you survive forever. Right. And the Platonists say, there is actually something that corresponds to this, and that it's precisely that pneumatic body, right? And because it survives a long time, but eventually you purify yourself completely and you return to the stars because it dies. Um, so that could be so if this does correspond to the argument for opposites, we shouldn't expect it to already be an argument for us to despise everything. Maybe the despising of honor and imaginary pleasures that only comes with the further point that for you to be able to have true knowledge, you have to separate yourself from perception. Right. And so maybe that you shouldn't have to weight everything here, put all the weight on this first part about bodily pleasures.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
the Let's continue. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, right. I didn't finish about the imagination, right? Like imagination is there's also like it would be the same question if we call like to what extent is honor a pleasure or I don't know, a good of the imagination? Because in some sense, like I mean, I guess it's similar to saying that food is a pleasure of the sense of touch or something, which is true, but also kind of weird way of describing what food is. Um,
Why is it not like saying that food is a pleasure of the sense of taste?
mm, I mean, because food is really nutrition. I mean, the pleasure,
Oh,
I guess, doesn't pertain really to that. It's like the only way I know of it, or if you're thinking of like cognition, I only know of it because I have some kind of sense. but that's not what it is. It doesn't exist. It's like saying that the world is like saying that the whole world only exists in your imagination, which is not
Mm,
even true for perceptible things. I mean, we might know them through the imagination, but they're not things of imagination.
right. Um, I see. I mean, on one level, I think the connection between food and taste is closer because taste is supposed to tell us what the nutrients are that we're eating, right? So, um, we're supposed to have a very varied diet. And no, the way we know we're having a varied diet is the things taste a lot different, right? And things like that. And of course, taste can sometimes tell you if something has gone bad, right? As if it's bad for you. Um, and so there's like a their taste does tell you something about the nutrition of what you're getting. Um, now is what's the case about honor? I mean, for me, it seems more clear that honor is something of the imagination because I imagine that I imagine I understand honor to be about how you see yourself, and that's something to do with um I mean, honor is not about how you are physically perceived, and it's nothing that you see. Um, I'm not sure. Oh, what you think that the more correct would be to say something like that honor is a pleasure of opinion, maybe?
I
Or
mean, of others' opinions, right?
others' opinions. The thing is, of course, like the other people can all have like a great opinion of you, but like nobody tells you. That doesn't satisfy the man the ambitious man. Everyone's like, yeah,
Hmm.
he's great. I love him. But if no one tells him that, the
Hmm.
ambitious man is not satisfied.
I,
Um,
I, yeah, I guess I mean, I would usually think that that would be like the super stimulus kind of version of honor. Like there's a version of honor where everyone gives you great applause but doesn't really respect you, and some people like that. But that's just a mistake, I think, in like what honor is. You would rather that they don't applause, but they like take your ideas seriously or something.
right. Well, I mean, like unless you're like a comedian
Yeah, that's
and
your
entertainer,
business.
it's your business. You like a comedian would be horrified if you like learned that. Oh my gosh, they're taking it seriously what I'm saying. Oh
Yeah,
no.
yeah, yeah, I get
Uh,
it. Well, I mean, the question is if well, I guess that's the question. Are like people we call celebrities, are they the people that have the most honor? In some sense, they're like not really.
hmm.
They have
Yeah,
something. I don't know if it would be honor. It's more like
right. Fame isn't exactly honor because you can be, yeah, because I mean, if we think about, yeah, like the stereotype of the celebrity is actually someone without honor, someone about whom there's so much gossip about breakups and cheating
mm,
and thief and backstabbing and all that. I mean, this is like the substance of celebrity life according to gossip columns. And the person who's always in the gossip column is a celebrity. And it's not a person who has honor. They have fame, but not honor. Um, so yeah, I'm not sure what Plato would say about celebrities. I mean, sure he'd have a low opinion of them, but you can't immediately translate what he says about desiring time to desire. 'Cause his example, of course, of the person who wants honor is the person who wants to be famous for winning wars,
mm,
right? And a famous general or things like that. And then there, yeah, the person is respected and they've done things that make people think good of them. The Yeah, the question then is like, where does this pleasure reside? because you would want to say something like it's neither in me nor in other people. It exists, say, in the city. Promise would have a way of saying that, right? Because he thinks that cities and clans are like living beings. So there would be something like the imagination of the city, right? That exists on its own. And um and so you would say, well, that's having that's where the honor exists and that's what people want. So having honor would be like something like having money in the bank, right? You don't have the money yourself, the bank has it. Um, and and that would also make it similar to the wanting to be rich, right? It's not necessarily that you have
Hmm.
um and of course wanting to be rich is similar to honor in the sense that of course that one way of spelling out being rich, or at least the advantage of being rich, is that people believe that you will pay them back, right? So you have credit, right? Credit is used in both for fame and also for money. Um, so and and there is a sense in where, and that goes back to the ideas of separation, right? Because you could think of someone who separates through honor, like the soldier who wants to be a famous soldier. So he's really strict with himself and he just eats what he has to and he trains all day and he has doesn't indulge in personal pleasures. It's all for the city. And there he's trying to, as it were, separate from himself and somehow become one with the city or something like that. Which is not what Plato or like the Platonists want. Um, so that would show a different um kind of life of purification. Hmm. Um, but maybe that life that already points to also why in this first step wanting abandoning ambition isn't mentioned. Because actually ambition can also lead to despising the corporeal pleasures. Um, yeah, there's a and but anyway, that
Like,
raises
I
you
mean, yeah, that's a different, yeah, like corporeal
that, but,
pleasures are a
but
problem for almost any kind of success. Like, it's not really, it doesn't lead directly to philosophy. Or like just like nowadays
yeah,
people like have like there's like
that's
this belief that it's just good in itself to have pleasure. But like in
yeah,
actuality, like making like there's almost nothing that like I always get into
that's
this like discussion where like all the old philosophers are like somewhat pro asceticism. People are like this is so weird. I'm like always like think of do you make a lot of money when you're just chasing immediate pleasures, or do you do any like doesn't any job basically require some level of asceticism?
yeah, that's
But
probably also
that's
behind the point that there's also the just the moral, so just the as it were, just the household virtues and also the political virtues, they already have some kind of indifference to pleasures,
hmm
right? Um,
right.
so yeah, so like even that's also something about that I'm always like curious about hedonism and when people say they're hedonists today or something like that. And it's like, yeah, but I mean, you'll still you'll still give up pleasures to like help your children. And so like the way you act is not like a hedonist,
Mm.
right? And then say, oh, but it's because I want my child to have pleasures, but like that's like further removed. You do it because it's your child or something like that. And so yeah.
Okay, yeah. So where am I?
So 72.
Let's try to
72.
finish this piece. 72. Plato too makes separate activity the proof of separate existence. Before Aristotle had used this argument. Okay. This is the purport of his conclusion. It is evident that the The philosopher detaches his soul from the body.
Right. Aristotle, of course, he doesn't use that argument. Aristotle says if someone wanted to show that the soul is separate, he would have to show that there is a separate activity. But whether Aristotle actually thought this is complicated.
Right. But this is just the like thing where like Aristotle didn't invent anything. He just
Yeah. Yeah.
um although it's not really what it says in Plato here. Like it's not like mm, I mean maybe somehow implied. I'm not sure.
Right. Yeah, they're stretching it a bit and uh uh yeah, he frees the soul from because here actually in just in this first passage, it doesn't say attribute to the philosopher any separate activity, right? Could even say, well, insofar as he's trying to move away from pleasures that's still related to the body. It's only in the next arguments when he talks about the pure thought, right? That seems to be a separate activity, but he hasn't mentioned pure thought here yet. Hmm.
Right. Aristotle's argument works something like if there's something that you don't do with your body, then who's doing it? There must be an immortal soul.
Yeah,
Plato's argument is something like people known as philosophers don't like their body. It's not really the same.
no, no.
Um, okay, 73. Why as far as possible and more than other people? Yeah. Because the soul can be detached only in the measure in which human nature permits this. Genii, or demons, right? Demons.
Yeah,
And gods detach themselves from the body in a different way.
right. That's curious. Um, I mean, so that explains the as far as possible. Right, the more than other people, what he's explaining here is like, why does he mention people here? And then he's saying, well, because the other beings detach themselves more. It's interesting that um, right. I think you could translate this as just are detached, and I think that's better. Because I don't think that daimonists and gods go through a process of detachment, right?
Hmm.
And so their detachment is different. This is also a thing that comes up in Plotinus. I think when we read uh there was like this digression in the thing on the Guardian Daimon about that, where he said, "Oh well, but doesn't the world always have its body?" And then he's like, "Yeah, but it works differently. The world soul works differently than ours." Right? And then this is like a classic issue that it seems like, why do you want to detach yourself from the body? Because like the heavenly bodies are divine and they have bodies, so why are you detaching yourself? And the uh Neoplatonist answers something like, well, they have perfect bodies that immediately follow their thoughts, so they don't even have to pay attention to them. And the point thing is like you don't have to not paying attention. Problem with this body is that you have to keep paying attention to it and it distracts you and things like that. Um, and besides, you also have a celestial body like that, so you have to like get rid of this body and then you'll just enjoy that perfect body that also the gods of the sky have. Um, so yeah, so that's the thing. And besides, that this as far as possible is like a very Platonic. It keeps coming up, for instance, in the Timaeus, right? That he imposes order and he organizes things as far as possible, and so on.
Hmm.
And 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 I guess, yeah, more than other people, like because since you're detaching and like, Socrates talked about how in the future he's going to meet other people right after he's dead. So and gods as well. So he's already thinking about like think more than just humans, and so that's why humans are mentioned here. Yeah. We have some time to continue.
Okay.
This next thing is shorter.
Okay, so let's start it.
Mhm.
The 3 points and the progress of the soul. 74. Soul has a threefold activity. The object being both the soul itself, the object of its activity, and what exists on either side, the lower and the higher. Hence, the three levels of life, meaning you can have a life pertaining to yourself or what's above or below you. Um, and each of these, the soul can choose three different ways, as we have said already. In social life, that of ruling of the lower or of finding within itself. This is like he's saying this is the three levels of purification that we discussed. Uh,
Right.
uh,
So he's going to show that there are three levels in the social, that is the political life, and three levels in the life of purification, and then three li levels in the contemplative life.
Okay.
Right.
Or of finding within itself the principles of its actions, or of looking up towards causes higher than the soul. Those would be three social levels.
Right.
Um, in the life of purification, there are ways of drawing back from the lower, of developing its drawing back from the lower. Okay, that would be pertaining to the lower instead
Right.
of controlling the lower, which was the political one. Of developing its own essential type, which is different than, how do you call it here? Finding the principles of
Fine.
its actions within itself. I'm not sure what any of these things are. Um, or of seeking the principles from which they spring, which would
R-
basically be the higher level already almost in
Right.
this
So
state.
the well, yeah, but finish and I'll
Let me
comment.
finish. And the same obviously holds of the contemplative life, which is still considers the superior entities either as exerting profit. So the whole contemplative life is really the third thing, where it's
Yeah.
living about something above you. But you can consider that in three ways: either the higher entities as exerting providence over the lower degrees of being, or as remaining within themselves, or as connected with what is beyond. So what is beyond them, right? Uh,
Yeah. So like the good and the gods. Yeah. So yeah, so in the political life, you rule over the lower. You do turn towards yourself, but then I think that's like not turn towards yourself in the sense of you're a separate soul, but turn towards yourself as an embodied soul, right? As a human being, right? And so you do exercise reason and try to figure out why you want to do what you want to do. The ruling the lower, of course, is the not necessarily ruling lower people, but ruling your appetites, right? And the third is looking up to causes higher than soul. So, um, or um, yeah, or higher than itself. Um, in the Greek, ta prootes, idea. Um, so that would just be like following your superiors. It could even be, right? It could be things higher than soul, like providence, but it could also just be being guided by higher considerations, like higher people. Um, then in the life of purification, these are, yeah, the developing its own essential type. Type translates eidos here. So I think that's the doing mathematics, right? Because you're unfolding, developing um the forms in you, or seeking the principles from which it has sprung, right? So turning towards news. And then, as you mentioned, that was what the contemplative life is entirely turned towards the higher things. Um, so yeah, so he's trying to show that there are these three activities in each of the levels, both towards itself and towards what is before it and after it. So it's a typical Platonist all in all, right? Do you want to do
Mhm.
75?
I guess, yeah, let's do one more. Um, Wait, I lost. Ah, okay. 75. We must take it that the disciplining of young people, which precedes the imparting of knowledge, shows the same three aspects. Interesting. And
Right.
this
So
is
this,
even before these three things?
yeah, because this corresponds to the moral virtue that's
Hmm.
prior to the political virtue.
Okay. Um, it trains them either to be moderate in their emotions, um, or to avoid them, or even to be completely ignorant of them as far as possible.
So
The
I think
last kind, that would
that
correspond to
corresponds to the
the higher
political,
thing.
moderate, and to avoid them to purificatory and to be completely ignorant to the contemplative.
Hmm. Interesting. And how he just gives sources. This last kind occurs in the Theaetetus. Here in the Phaedo, we have the training that aims at purification, and the laws and the Republic, and often else we have civic education. What is
Right.
the
That's the passage of the Theaetetus. If I'm not mistaken, this is the digression about how you have to flee this world and
mm,
assimilate yourself to God. And in the Phaedo, we have the training that aims at purification. So that's about being ignorant of the emotions. Phaedo is about being moderate in their emotions, and laws it's about the I mean the Phaedo is about avoiding the emotions, and laws and Republic is about being moderate in emotions. Yeah.
so and all of these things um, are part of education, disciplining of young people. Like how is the Phaedo discipline or even the Theaetetus? If I remember how I understood that, it's basically saying that political virtue is not enough. You have to aim at the beyond and assimilating to gods and so on. Yeah, and there might be some assimilation to God also in political virtue and so on, but here he wants to have all of them as part of.
Yeah, this is a puzzling. Um, um, about why they're all about young people. Um, and indeed, it's what I'm I'm really not. Yeah, I'll have to come back to this and look into it. The 75. Maybe there's something specific in the Theaetetus text that indicates this. Uh, yeah,
But what
in the
it means
Valedict.
something like just because we're supposed to teach young people these dialogues, like how.
No, I don't think that's that's what it's about. It's about that in these dialogues we have the example of teaching young people this. The laws of the Republic is clearly, yeah, they discuss how you raise children, right?
Mhm.
That's very clear.
Yeah, but that
Um,
makes sense because it's about political virtue.
yeah, the
Although it
I
is
mean
aiming
the
at them becoming philosophers or some of them and so on.
yeah, although the Theaetetus, it is true that he's talking to a young person. Theaetetus is young, and I'm not really sure if, like, well, I think there are some younger and some older people in the audience of the Phaedo. Um, but yeah, it's oh, I'm not sure whether we have in each of these just a an exact maybe that it's two different points. Just that sure, in education of young people we have these three things. And then it's just that the Theaetetus is about contemplative virtue, and this one's about purificatory, and the political dialogue is about political virtue. And that's it. But it's not that the Theaetetus has something to do um um with raising children. It's just that it gives an example of a life that completely avoids or that is completely ignorant of emotion. Maybe that's it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. This paragraph is puzzling. And well, that's it, unless you have time to finish up.
Yeah. No, I could think of something like practically like you need like I guess because if you think practically of all these like there's this whole scale of virtues, it's probably not like the case that you know there's that they're very well separated in like real life because I mean almost nobody is going to be even purificatory all the time. Maybe like you could always describe it as like different people. Like there are some really extraordinary people, but I don't know to what extent like all of Plato and this is just addressed to that one person in 10 million. Um, so if it's to be anyway practical, it's going to be something like uh,
Mm.
different activities or I don't know, making space for all of them or doing some of it sometimes. And then there's you seem to need a way to like teach like that's why this whole like all in all seems to help because you need to like a way to how do you talk about contemplative virtue to someone who really doesn't even have political virtue yet? There probably is a way to do that.
Right. Yeah. Although yeah, I am curious about that specifically, about like what when we're educating young people, how do we lead them to ignore um to be ignorant of affections? Um, I can only think about it as like that there are things that we keep hidden from young people in the sense that, oh, that's so, that's too violent, that's too sexual or something for a young person to be exposed to. And that that those limits that we put on young people that, oh, this is for older people, you shouldn't be near that. That would then be an image later of like what the contemplative person is. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's also like interesting way of thinking about the contemplative life, like that it's you're so immersed in nous and then you just ignore things because that's too immature for you now, maybe something like that. So whereas the young people say, "Oh, this is too mature for you," the contemplative person says, "Oh, that's too immature for me. That's childish," or something like that. Um, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, next week,
Okay.
um,
Yes,
yeah,
should be fine.
for me
Okay,
too.
thank you.
Okay.